Today I want to talk about a player that no one really thinks about. He was a star for a big-time program for 2 years, was drafted in the second round, and is now considered the future of the Houston Texans defense. The guy we're referring to is Kamari Lassiter. At one point, he was seen as one of the top recruits in the state, but many questioned if he really had that much potential in college. Not only did he live up to that potential, but he became one of the next great Georgia defensive backs, and now has a ton of hype going into the NFL after he was drafted into the second round by the Houston Texans. In today's video, we're going to continue our series spotlighting rookie players and talk about the journey and story of Kamari Lassiter. We're going to talk about how he went from an unknown player to a blue chip recruit in just a few months, how he ended up at Georgia, how he did there, and what his future could look like for the Texans. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, topic, team, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about the insane rise of Kamari Lassiter. In order to understand how Kamari Lassiter got to this point, we first need to go back in time. He grew up in the state of Georgia, specifically the city of Savannah, and this would instill a love for the game of football in him from a young age. Eventually, as a teenager, he would move to the Tuscaloosa, Alabama area and would eventually become a football star. As a kid, he loved the physicality of the game and said, quote, "When I first started playing football, that was something they instilled at me at a young age. I've always just liked being physical, and I used to get kicked out of recess for tackling too hard. Things like that have always been a part of me." He would eventually arrive at American Christian Academy and would show early on that he had the makings of a future Power 5 talent. Flashing forward to 2021, he would make the Army All-American Bowl, which was a culmination of a ton of work. He said, quote, "It's a dream come true, honestly. That's a goal I set when I was very young, because I used to watch guys like Najee Harris and Tim Tebow play in that game. Now to be a part of it is a dream come true." Lassiter would eventually blow up as a recruit, as he went from a guy who was a 3-star with very few offers, to then becoming a big deal. Things would, though, start out slow. He said, quote, "My offers didn't really start rolling in until about the offseason of my sophomore year. I had a pretty good sophomore year, and I was able to go to camps and stuff and be recognized at a national level, but I got mostly small offers. Then my junior year, my really big offers started to roll in from places like Alabama, Georgia, and Auburn. He truly was a catch for college recruiters, as he checked many boxes. American Christian's head coach expected him to be an impact player at the college level. He said, quote, "He's long, has speed, he's aggressive, and doesn't shy away from contact. His football IQ is off the charts, and he's a 4.0 student who also did well in the ACT. The sky is the limit for him for sure." As a junior in 2019, he played on both sides of the ball, catching 34 passes for 800 yards and 15 touchdowns. He also made 29 tackles and intercepted 4 passes on defense. It would eventually come down to all the top dogs, such as Alabama, Auburn, Clemson, Georgia, Florida State, and LSU. But where would he end up going? Well, in 2020 he would make his decision, as while Georgia did lose their game against Georgia in Tuscaloosa, they wouldn't leave completely empty-handed, as just after they lost that game, they would get a commit from Lassiter over Auburn and Alabama. Why the Dawgs? He said, quote, "Overall, the way Georgia recruited me stood out. They were relentless, and I could tell they wanted me. I could really tell they cared for me, and the way they recruited me nonstop showed me a lot through this whole process." What's funny is at one point, Lassiter was pretty much committed to Auburn, but then he would eventually take a trip to Athens and everything would change. He said after he visited Athens, he knew Georgia was the right school for him. Charlton Warren, the DB's coach for Georgia, led his recruitment, and the two forged a great relationship. Some, though, were not sold on Lassiter. At the time, he was considered a 3-star recruit, and scouts were not sure if 1, he'd be a good player, and 2, if he could make it at a school like Georgia. But Kirby Smart knew what he was doing, as he always got good defensive backs in his recruiting classes, and with their staff getting him and evaluating him well, many believed they were probably going to be right about him. He would also eventually sell the doubters wrong, and part of that was because of the it factor he possessed. His coach said, quote, "On any given Friday night, I always tell people Kamari's going to do something that just sort of amazes the crowd. He's going to do something electrifying, and he didn't come off the field for us very often." Honestly, it was true. During his senior year, he caught 32 passes for 833 yards and 11 touchdowns, and on defense, he had 70 tackles, 10 TFLs, 2 picks, and even forced a fumble. He'd eventually win the Alabama State Player of the Year, and he'd help the Patriots have an undefeated regular season and appearance in the 4A semifinals. They would eventually lose to the eventual state champions, and that was disappointing. They ended up winning their first 13 games of the season, and during his time at American Christian, they went 36-4. That's pretty crazy. His coach said, quote, "To me, he is the total package. From academics to athletics to character, he's just a great kid who is able to retain a lot of the football field and go out and apply it. He's a special, special kid." According to 24/7 Sports, Lassiter was a 4-star recruit, the number 14 corner, and the 186th best player in the class of 2021. So, how would he end up doing in Athens? Well, let's take a look. So when Lassiter arrived at Georgia, he was seen as a player who would play with a ton of swagger. Many compared him to a Richard LeCounte with a blend of Christopher Smith. That's pretty good. In the summer of 2021, Kirby Smart said, quote, "Kamari Lassiter is a guy that didn't get to play in the spring, and he wasn't here, but he's been a surprise highlight of camp." Honestly, there wasn't much room for Lassiter to make an impact as a freshman, as it just so happened he would join the most dominant defense in college football and one of the best defenses ever. He appeared in all 15 games in 2021 and would end up carving out a role on special teams. He said, quote, "Our freshman year, me and Javon Bullard used to joke around, and we were like, we are special teams All-Americans. This was because we weren't really sniffing the field with all those guys that were playing that year." As I said, Lassiter didn't end up getting a chance to do much as a freshman, as he ended up finishing with 11 total tackles, 2 pass deflections, and 1 interception. But going into 2022, a lot of things would change for him. Now he would move from the nickel position to the outside position, and he became one of the alphas of Kirby Smart's secondary. AKA, he began to start. He ended up finishing with 38 total tackles, 8 assisted tackles, 4 pass deflections, and even half of a sack. Georgia once again had an insanely dominant team, and their defense was just as good as advertised. They won a second straight national championship, and Lassiter was becoming a big part of the defense. Eventually, as a junior, he was named one of the top players on the team going into 2023, and he was in charge of holding down the left side of the field for the Bulldogs. He was one of the reasons why Georgia allowed the second fewest yards in the SEC, and he said, quote, "Since I've gotten here, I've tried to just be on my P's and Q's, because when I first got here, I learned the standard quickly from the older guys that were here." Lassiter ended up being a veteran presence in Georgia's defensive backfield, and this group was extremely young. He started alongside Keely Ringo in 2022, and now with him off to the NFL in 2023, he became the headline guy. In total, Lassiter would finish with 37 tackles, 8 pass deflections, and even half of a sack. Georgia would go undefeated in the regular season, but would lose to number 8 Alabama in the SEC championship game, and the Tide would take their spot in the college football playoff. This was extremely sad for him, as they would then have to play Florida State, but they would end up killing him. He saved his best season for last, as I said, as according to Pro Football Focus, he only allowed 15 receptions on 37 pass attempts for 135 yards this past year. In total, he started every game for Georgia in both 2022 and 2023, and became a second-team All-SEC selection this past season, and did not allow a single touchdown. In 3 years with the Dawgs and 1,100 snaps in coverage, only 2 players scored touchdowns against Lassiter. Because of this, he declared for the 2024 NFL Draft and was expected to be a Day 2 pick. Lassiter said his 3 seasons in the SEC thought it prepared him for the transition to the NFL, saying, quote, "I feel like playing in the SEC is a direct pipeline to playing in the league. You play some of the best players in the country, and you're playing in the best conference, and you're playing the best football." He would record the fastest 3-cone drill amongst all the players with a 6.2 second mark, and then he had a 4.2 second time in the shuttle run, which was the 9th fastest at the combine for them. He also showcased he had extremely strong coverage skills in 2023, but what separated him from other top corners was his willingness to hit. He made a habit of blowing up screens and helping out in the run game. From an on-the-field standpoint, Lassiter was considered one of the top corners, and he also really impressed with his attitude during pre-draft meetings, but eventually he ran a 4.6 40 time, and this would knock him out of the first round. According to NFL Mock Database, he was a projected second-round pick in the 54th overall prospect. He had a 25% chance of going in the first round, but that would not end up happening. The Houston Texans would eventually select him at number 42 in the draft, and on this day, he wore a silver lock around his neck. He said, quote, "I like to call myself the locksmith, and I pride myself having stuff on lock, so I really just wanted to get a lock and put the name Locksmith Lassiter on there and just kind of say I'm going to lock in." They said the Texans spent a second-round pick on him, and he's expected to be a big part of the secondary during his rookie season. But his home will remain a mystery, as he has a couple different options of where he could play. He'll also have a decent amount of competition, as Houston has 9 corners on its roster, and 7 of those corners have started in the NFL. Last year, Miles Bryant started 9 games for the Patriots, CJ Henderson started 7 games for the Panthers, and Jeff Okudah started 9 games for the Falcons. It will be somewhat of an uphill battle for Lassiter, but I think he'll end up getting a chance to play a lot as a rookie, and by the end of the year, he could be one of the better rookie corners in the league. I think he'll be on a similar career path like Jalen Petre, and with Lassiter's ability to hit, tackle, and play hard, I think he'll make an instant impact and will really fit with the culture that the Texans are trying to build. It's crazy, at one point, he was kind of an unknown name on the recruiting scene, and many didn't know if he'd ever actually pan out at Georgia, but he eventually ended up blowing up, started 2 years, became an All-SEC member, and is now a second-round pick. Lassiter is one of the hidden stories of this year's draft class, and I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, be sure to let me know down below what you think. Let me know what prospect I should cover next. Leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.